So you're in the market for a brand new television. OLED versus QLED comes to mind and you immediately ask yourself which technology is better. Today I'll be addressing that, and to do so I'll be using everyday real-world content. So that means no test patterns, no technical mumbo jumbo. We're literally going to be talking about it like everyday real-world folks. Smack a huge like on this video if you appreciate the concept, because regardless of your technical experience or background, you'll be able to understand this one. Now, to do this, I was able to use my Nvidia RTX 2060 Super gaming PC, along with my Sony AAG and Samsung Q8FN QLED television, in order to pull off all the results achieved in this video. Now, a little disclaimer I do have to throw out before we do get fully started here: you will not be able to just watch this video and see all the things that I'm seeing on my end, so make sure you're following the commentary until the end to get the full scope of what I'm saying here. Oh, and as a little bonus, I've made sure to turn on ray tracing on my RTX gaming PC so that we can see how that technology affects some things as well. And with that, let's get started. Okay, so we have the Samsung Q8FN to the right and the Sony AAG to the left. I'll open up the menu for the Sony so you can see it's the Sony. The Samsung's remote's back there, but you guys know I already have it. Now, that being said, we're going to go into our graphics settings so you guys can see that we're actually on PC to do this. And I just set it to 1080p, something that most people will be able to pull off in today's world. You know, something very simple, right? Okay, so we're rocking 1080-60 and VSync. Make sure you turn that on. People are turning it off. It causes frame tearing if you don't use it. Now, the difference between VSync, FreeSync, Nvidia G-Sync, and all that stuff, I'll talk about in a different video. There's a lot of opinions about that, and I'll talk about facts later on. But the point is, just turn it on, and you got that 60 hertz right there. So there we go. And everything's pretty much maxed out to ultra outside of like ray tracing, which I find to be pretty problematic. When you start ramping it up too high, it doesn't really do much. So I leave it to medium because it ironically gives me the best result. Now, that being said, that's how we have it set up, pretty much everything maxed out. Now, as you can clearly see, the OLED has the deeper black levels and the richer picture overall. I think that's just one of the biggest things that really will shock a lot of people when putting it up against a high-end QLED. Now, I'm actually going to have to go in the back here because I didn't do it earlier. And I'm going to grab my Samsung remote here. Now, for all intents and purposes, you see I'm in the natural picture mode, which is one of the brighter modes that this TV does have to offer. But again, it's not like it's so bright. I mean, I do see some clipping here happening on the camera, but nothing that shouldn't, be visible. But the point is, you can see that it's fluid either way on both displays. Though I do notice when I move Samsung, it's instantaneous, where Sony has a lag. If you see that, where there's a lag as you turn, Samsung is like instantaneous, and Sony is just kind of like lagging behind. And that does play a role as far as the responsiveness of gameplay. Now, not all OLEDs suffer from this problem. Sony's typically are pretty bad with this, but in general, it's just going to be a richer picture as far as OLED's concerned. But there are differences that we should talk about. One is color. A lot of people are ignoring this, but QLED does have better color, or at least color coverage. If you look at this scene, I don't know how much of it you can actually see, but I'll try to center it a little bit more like that. The QLED has just so many shades of color that the OLED just can't hit because it's not using quantum dots. Not to say that OLED's color on Sony's side of things is bad, but it's definitely not as visually vibrant as the QLED. Now, some opt to saying that when you don't have as much color as the Samsung, that means that it's the more natural and lifelike image, and that is not true. Color in real life, as our eyes see it, is way more saturated than even the BT 2020 color space. So that's something to think about. But that being said, it's a very vibrant image on both TVs, but the QLED is displaying significantly more vibrant shades, especially like of primary colors, like blue right now. Incredible on QLED, and by comparison, the OLED does look a little muted as far as the color goes. But that being said, OLED's benefit is going to be the detail. So if you're somebody who's a stickler for detail, I don't know, maybe that's something you might want to think about as well. Also, when you get into bright scenes, there's this misconception that OLED will always give you the better shadows. That's not always true either, because when you look at things like the high contrast elements, like there's a little tree thing right over here on both TVs. It's not only richer on the QLED, where you see more color separation in the color green. Over here, all these different shades of green, and then you have this dark area of tree line, shadow casting. That's really important when you're talking about, again, just displays and what a TV is capable of doing, because that's the difference in gaming. And as I look at this scene on both TVs, to be very honest with you, I prefer the look of the QLED. It's showing me more of a realistic image as to what I would see in the real world, as far as like how green is projected as actual green with variances to them. And yes, the water is murky, but it's also a vibrant shade of murky green that it tells a certain ambiance that the game developer was trying to portray. And OLED is just not doing that because WRGB is diluting the colors of it. And this is what people are talking about. Look at the difference between these two displays. The OLED, by comparison, does look like the more washed out and more dead display. Now that's a fact when we're talking about WRGB OLEDs. If they develop some sort of quantum dot monster in the years to come, then maybe these results might change. But so far, this is a big difference as far as what you're going to see in color. Now, in detail, that's where OLED will always win, in my personal opinion, because so far I haven't seen an LED able to render on this level, where we're seeing the foliage in the background, all the trees, they look three-dimensional. This is also attributed to Sony's X1 Extreme processor, but also OLED technology. And the two of those combined together make for an awesome element. Samsung doesn't have anything close to that, and the picture by comparison looks flat and more one-dimensional, or should I say, or to be fair, two-dimensional than the three-dimensional depth and draw and immersion that just makes you feel like you're kind of just looking through a picture instead of at one. And that's one of the biggest differences that I've noticed in gameplay. And I find that it's gonna, if you're willing to compromise a little bit of color, I think that's going to be something that, again, both sides of the aisle are going to have to figure out. Now, when we talk about responsiveness, again, Sony's TVs are awful for that typically. They do not have good input lag, and I don't foresee that changing in the near future. Now, I want to try to jump in this water here so you guys can get an idea of what I'm talking about when I say detail. We're going to go over here and we're going to look at these branches. Again, as I look, the color on QLED is more varied, but the color is also not giving you as much detail in certain parts. Like, it's really hard to depict this, but like when you look at the branch on OLED, you can see every little color. And that's the part where OLED's color, even though it's washed out, is impressive because it's isolating each individual pixel, giving you the color that you're looking for, where QLED is not going to do that. It just kind of hits like a broad stroke, like it's a broad stroke of the brush. This is supposed to be green instead of this is supposed to be this tone of green as programmed by the developer. So a lot of people prefer OLED because it can get more accurate as far as like certain key colors and details. And that's what people are talking about. Though, in essence, in real-world uses, for the most part, when you're looking at a wide scene, you're not going to be able to look at a branch or a leaf or something like that. You're going to be watching something probably like this, where somebody's moving pretty fast and getting to point A to point B and just moving around, right? And as I look at both displays, I like the look of both, but I got to say the color on QLED is really freaking impressive. It looks really good. But the black levels of OLED give a certain level of detail. Like, as Laura's moving around, you can see there's just shadows in the water that don't exist on QLED that should be there. A level of immersion that is gone. And that's something you're going to have to, it's like tomato, tomato. You've got to choose what you're willing to sacrifice. We're going to go underwater now. Look at the rays of light reflecting off of the ocean floor. Look at all the color that you have on QLED, but then look at the isolation of the rays on OLED. It's a very different ballgame. I mean, right down to looking at the plants, right? We can look at the luminosity coming through off of the plants. There's way more coming through. I'm going to see if I can show you guys this. We've got way more coming through here on this side, right there, than we do on OLED or on QLED. And it's pretty impressive to see this kind of stuff. Now I'm going to give Laura some air so we don't end up killing her here, but you can get the idea that there's a lot going on here. It's not just as simple as one's better than the other. They both edge each other out in different areas. And that's the main idea here. Now, again, I'm using ray tracing to show this off, and I'm using an RTX 2060 Super. So again, as you get into your new consoles and you start looking at the next generation of technology, this is more or less the kind of difference that you're going to appreciate from these two displays. I mean, I'm looking at these two trying to discern a real difference here, and again, it will always, for me, as far as what my eyes are discerning, come back to The QLED is more vibrant and has loads more color, but OLED and its detail rendering is superb and unmatched. And that's what I'm seeing right here. Is that to say QLED's detail rendering is bad? No, it's just not on the same level. Now, that being said, there are going to be some implementations of OLED this year. Supposedly, Hisense has found a cure for burn-in. I wouldn't hold my breath on that because they haven't really announced that too heavily at CES. They were really quiet about that. So Vizio with their OLED is going to no doubt try to make a claim. Everybody will have a claim that OLED's the best, and with OLED everything becomes so much better. And same with QLED. The reality is they both do different things. Now look at this here. Again, as we're looking at the color transitions as we go, and this is again why it gets hard. You have to choose what details you value, right, in an image. So now looking at this image, OLED by far is destroying the QLED, and this is where it gets hard because QLED is telling the image, I only want to see the brightness coming off of these rocks and reflecting in the overall environment. But OLED is able to say, well, no, there's more happening in this scene. We should have the light reflecting off of the rocks, and we should also have the rocks themselves looking like actual objects as a three-dimensional object. Like it's so punchy and poppy, like the way these rocks are rendered versus how flat the QLED looks by comparison. So it's really good to see that. I mean, again, though, this is not something that you're probably going to do in real content. So I'm going to show you guys the main opening of the story so you guys can get an idea with something that's actually moving. So what I'll do, we're going to exit out to the main menu here, and we're just going to start a new game up so that you guys can see in real time that there's a lot going on between both. Now for this example, I have to handhold it a little bit because I can't exactly line my tripod up perfectly. So you are going to have to bear with a little bit of shaking here and there. So just to point that out. But as we're loading it up, you're going to see the differences. One of the differences obviously is that, again, OLED is getting the true black that you're able to see in a lot of these scenes. Again, there's no such thing as perfect black, but it is definitely a lot darker than the Q8FN. Now, in watching this scene, you can see like they perform very closely to one another in moving content and real content. They are very similar, but right now as I look at this opening scene, the Sony is edging out the QLED in terms of overall color because they have a richer representation of cyan. Right here, the roof's blowing off. QLED's red though, still really nice, very, very vivid. But it's the three-dimensionality of this scene that's really blowing my mind right now because there's so much drawn immersion and you can actually see the particles of snow on OLED, and it's a better experience if I'm being all honest with you as far as like what you're getting detail wise. Now I think that's important to note if you're trying to decide between detail and color, though again it goes back to those two things, and how you watch your TV is going to depend on what you end up choosing. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You go Samsung if you want the best and most vibrant color, but you go OLED if you want the more detailed and more immersive image quality, I would have to say. It really is tomato tomato. There is no wrong or right answer, and ultimately what you choose depends on what you watch. If you need more help, make sure you join Friday's live stream at 7 p.m. through 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I answer all of your questions live. Thanks for watching the #1 brand in honesty, and until the next video, I'll see you guys later.